The Hermit of Russian Lake. Big Moose Lake had been an out-of-the-way destination for vacationers and hunters since the late 19th century. It managed to retain much of its remote nature during the 20th century, unlike most of the Fulton chain, a series of vast lakes not far south of Big Moose, while the other sizable lakes in the central Adirondacks had become tourist hubs, lined with grand hotels serviced by steamboats and railroads. Big Moose only begrudgingly built new settlements, and the hotels that did spring up were never all that successful. Keith Lane had visited the area with friends over the years and wanted to share some of the charming solace of the lake with his wife, Becky, and their baby girl. He hoped to build a foundation for positive mutual memory there and have a spot to return to each summer that they could make their own. He and Becky were having a difficult marriage, wanting different things in life, with disparate plans and goals. The vacation was meant to be a first step toward mending their relationship. However, things never seemed to go as planned for Keith. Becky hated the cramped confines of the bungalow that her husband had rented. She complained from the minute they arrived about the furniture, the lack of things to do, the difficulty of caring for their 1-year-old daughter in an unfamiliar place. She really let Keith know that he was putting her out on this little vacation of his. Not a day and a half had passed before Keith needed to get out of the cottage and away from his wife's niggling. Becky and the baby were sleeping, so he decided to take the canoe from the backyard and put it out onto the water. He knew from an earlier trip that in the eastern bay of the lake there was a dock, and from there a short hiking path to a campsite and pond. He was determined to experience a little of his own type of vacation, whether Becky gave him a hard time about it or not. The 40-minute long paddle was leisurely with a gentle wind at his back. Not many powered boats were out on the water that day, likely because it was overcast and threatening rain. He waved to a carpenter piloting a flat-top motorboat full of old dock lumber. Keith arrived at the small dock and tied up his canoe. He found the marked flat forest trail with ease and followed it toward Russian Lake. The path appeared well traveled, and along the way, he passed a man and a boy carrying a canoe, presumably back from the pond. They paused to talk. "Hey, were you guys camping?" asked Keith. "Yep, we stayed overnight at the lean-to. It's a really nice little lake up there," said the father. "It looks like it might rain, so we're trying to get back." Keith left the pair behind and continued on the path for another half-mile until he reached the lean-to, which sat on a bluff overlooking the pond. He saw the obvious signs of the campsite in front: a fire pit, trampled grass, and indentations where gear had been parked for the night. The pond itself held a small island, densely covered with trees, grass, and underbrush, as was most of the surrounding area. It was the end of the trail, and he thought it odd that there weren't more trails going off into the vast Pigeon Lake wilderness area which lay to the north, south, and east. He wandered down to the small lake, peering into the brackish water for any sign of life. A beaver caught his attention as it swam from shore to the small island. He spotted the creature's bulky timber pile near a small outlet stream and searched out a spot where he could get a better look at the developing dam. When Keith had walked far enough along the shore, he spied a gently tread game path that he could follow to the outlet. He waded through tall grass, flicking burrs and thorns, and swiped away various clinging bugs from his pants. Loons called out from a thick patch of reeds nearby. Their eerie, almost wolf-like territorial posturing made him jump. Finally, he reached the outlet stream and looked over the beginnings of the dam. The The sun peeked out for a few minutes, and Keith saw something metallic shimmer downstream. He walked along the rocky brook toward the mysterious glistening beacon. Eventually, he could begin to make out some sort of structure among the trees. A little clearing had been made, on which sat a shack. Keith had heard stories of the guides, mountain men, and hermits who had once occupied solitary settlements in the deep woods. Men who had been present for nearly every exploration and discovery, the lore makers themselves. He was a student of Adirondack history, yet was stunned at the existence of a hermitage in the 21st century, reasoning that the state of New York wouldn't stand for such a thing on its hallowed public land. Smoke drifted from the makeshift chimney of the cobbled-together structure. The aluminum wall panels and asphalt shingle roof were set at odd angles, and the whole thing seemed about to collapse. Keith was startled from his structural study by the emergence of an old hermit, obviously the proprietor of the squatter's refuge. "Are you lost?" asked the old man. "No," replied Keith. "Then get lost," said the old man abruptly, and returned to his adobe. Keith paused, unsure if he shouldn't just turn around and hurry himself back to his canoe. The old man returned with a tobacco pipe in his mouth, already puffing it in caricature of the classic mountain men. "Sir, my name's Keith. I was checking out the beaver dam and saw the sun shine off the aluminum down here. I was just curious, you know." The old fellow sauntered over to him. They both stood about the same height, a little over 6 feet tall. "As you can probably figure out, I'm here on this land illegally, and any mention of my being here to the wrong sort of people will get me arrested and tossed out on my head. I won't say anything. I'm just at the lake for a week on vacation." Keith looked at the weathered shack and the surrounding area with curiosity. "How long have you been out here?" "Decades, but who's counting?" The old man broke a yellow, weary smile and continued to puff away at his pipe. "I suppose you'd like to see inside?" Keith nodded and followed the old man into the shack. The first thing he noted were the modern provisions. There were canned food tins, a tidy collection of recyclables, and a new portable propane stove. It all struck him as neatly utilitarian. The only non-essential item seemed to be a stack of hardcover books and a few magazines that sat on one small homemade table. "Do you want some coffee?" asked the old man, as he set some water to boil on his stove. "Sure." Keith was directed to sit in one of the rough-hewn chairs. "So what do you think?" "Sir, I'd have to say that I'm surprised at how well organized everything seems." The old man nodded. "Thanks. I've had time to get things right. Plenty of it." "Do you hunt and fish for food?" The old man looked at Keith queerly. "No, I buy my food in Eagle Bay at the market, the same as everyone else. I do make a little money trapping, legally, of course." Keith was taken aback at how normal the hermit seemed. He figured there had to be something horribly awry in the psyche of someone brave enough to endure an Adirondack winter in such a hovel. "Does it get boring out here?" "No, just simple. God, I wish my life would get simpler. I have a baby girl and my wife is sure she wants us to get separated." "Sorry to hear that, son." "It's just so goddamn infuriating that she could upend my life because she's bored or sick of it all or whatever." Keith looked at the old man, who had been listening intently. He was embarrassed by what he had just revealed to the stranger. The old man added some instant coffee to the now boiling pot on the stove and then poured 2 mugs, setting one in front of his guest. "You've a right to be angry. I'm sure life out here can be miserable and difficult, but it seems like it can be a paradise too." The old man didn't respond. He gave Keith a bagel and sat down in the other rickety chair across the small room. They sat in silence for a few minutes. Rain began pattering on the roof and aluminum walls. "I should probably get back before it starts pouring," said Keith, standing. "Do you have a motor?" "No, canoe." "It's going to be a rough paddle back. The wind pushes east," said the old man, feeling briefly paternalistic toward Keith. "I'll be fine. Don't exhaust yourself. Tie up to docks along the way and rest." "Okay, thanks." Keith took a few steps to the door, then paused. "You've got a real great spot out here. I won't tell anyone." The old man nodded his thanks, and Keith left the cottage. He jogged back down the brook to the pond, then up to the trail that began at the lean-to. It was raining lightly by the time he got into his canoe on Big Moose. The water was already pushing roughly against the far eastern bank. As soon as Keith nudged out onto the water, he knew the wind was going to be a real problem. He tossed his backpack into the front of the canoe to try and keep the boat even with the stern. But his backpack wasn't heavy enough to keep the front end of the boat down, and the wind was pushing it each way, making paddling in a straight line impossible. He struggled against the piling water and strong gusts to drag the canoe, little by little, away from the dock. The first 20 minutes were fine. He made decent headway and was practically within sight of a smaller bay to the south, which had a public boat launch, but the storm grew increasingly intense, and he knew that he wasn't going to make it back to his cottage on the water. It wasn't a long walk from the launch to where he was staying, and he could return with his jeep and grab the canoe from the parking area. 20 more minutes had passed by the time Keith realized he had gone no more than 50 yards. He was paddling furiously, and his shoulders, back, and arms were fatigued. He knew he could always stop at one of the docks, or even pull his canoe onto the shore, and deal with the possibility of an unfriendly dock or cabin owner. A group of older ladies passed him with their speedboat and waved as he tried not to panic from his predicament. The combination of a sudden blast of wind, followed by a small wake from the passing boat, knocked the paddle from Keith's hand. He lunged for it and had it nearly within his grasp when another strong gust sent him plunging into the water. The canoe tipped behind him, knocking him in the head. He struggled against his open life jacket in trying to find the surface, cursing himself for loosening it when he had begun to sweat from exertion. The carpenter's flat-top boat, now devoid of cargo, pulled up alongside Keith as he was treading water. The man pulled him in his canoe on board. Keith, completely exhausted, could barely manage a thank you to his rescuer. The rain was pouring as the boat cut through the choppy water and away from East Bay. "Are you staying on the lake?" Keith could only nod and point. He was out of breath, cold and sodden, but he was able to direct the carpenter to the dock off the property where he was staying with little issue. "Christ, thank you so much, man," said Keith, as the pair unloaded his canoe right onto the dock. "No problem. You're not the first to get stuck out there. I don't know why they bother maintaining that dock and that trail to nowhere," said the carpenter. Keith shrugged and tried not to grin as he thought of the old man. He thanked the carpenter again, then returned to the cottage, unsure of how much of his tale he'd share with Becky. The Hermit of Russian Lake wasn't used to having visitors. Linear time for him was inconsequential, and how much of it passed between events was nebulous at best. There were 3 seasons in his world, and they merely cycled. Winter was an endurance event each and every year, followed by mud season, which coincided with an incessant black fly nuisance, and finally, summer. Summer in the Adirondacks was the reason one would endure the other 2 seasons on the fringes of the wild. The hermit didn't consider himself of the wild, as he benefited from modern convenience, the same as the campers who came out to his little lake every so often. He shopped once a month at the Big M grocery store in Eagle Bay. The hike wasn't bad at all once he found the maintained trail south of Big Moose. He had enough money saved that he could continue his meager existence indefinitely. The community bank in Long Lake saw him once per year. He cashed his fur and hide checks and withdrew a varying amount, usually based on the projected price of propane for the winter. Though the hermit mostly kept to himself, a small legend had grown around his periodic appearances in the towns from Inlet to Long Lake. He had acquaintances that he spent time with during the hunting and trapping seasons. Most didn't know that he lived in the woods, and he shared very little of his past with them, a past which he had mostly suppressed or nearly forgotten by the time he had spent half of his life as a solitary recluse. A young man appeared at his door one summer as if he had been there before. He even seemed to knock as if he were visiting an old friend. It irritated the old man. The wandering curiosity of the upper middle class who descended upon the big lake from their luxurious cabins with party boats, speedboats, and now biplanes. They would traipse into his world from time to time, but they usually turn on their heels at the first sight of his camp and well before making contact. Yes, said the hermit, answering the knock, but not the door. He figured a little unpleasantness would be enough to send the visitor on his way. My name's Keith. I met you out here a few years back. The old man shuffled to the door, exhausted from a morning spent chopping wood. He opened it but didn't recognize the interloper. Yeah, I don't remember you. The young man paused, considering if he should just leave. I was staying on the lake with my wife and baby girl. I canoed over, followed the stream, and wandered into the clearing. We had coffee. The hermit looked at him quizzically, half remembering some detail. I don't get many visitors out here, and if I recall correctly, the last one may have drowned on his way back over Big Moose during the microburst. That storm did a hell of a number on my cottage. It nearly tore my roof off. He pointed to some of the repairs he had done over the door. I'm looking for some advice. I think I might want to try and live a solitary life in the woods. The old man chuckled, openly sneering. My advice? I'm the last person who should be doling out advice on how one should live. I'm not on a spiritual quest or something. I'm running from the police. Keith felt relieved to reveal his troubles to someone. I'm just looking for a few tips, maybe an idea where I should go. The hermit's brow furrowed. Are you a thief? Keith shook his head. No, I just haven't been making the best decisions lately. No, you haven't. Someone certainly saw you come over here, and eventually I'll be found out because of it, and my home will be demolished. Not to mention, I'll be arrested like a common criminal. The old man looked the fugitive over. Come in, I suppose. He let Keith in and closed the door. Jesus, I'm sorry. She was gonna leave me. I actually saw red. I didn't think it was a real thing, but I actually saw red and the knife right there on the cutting board, said Keith, panicking. Stop it. I don't care what you've done or who you are. We're screwed now, both of us. Keith broke down sobbing. I loved her more than anything, and she just wrecked everything for us. For my daughter. The old man sat Keith in the rickety chair at his small wooden table. Give me a minute. Let me think about this. We can figure something out. There was a firm knock at the cottage door, and the hermit was pulled from his silent meditation. He nervously turned and approached the door, hesitant to pull the handle. "Hello?" said a man's voice. "Are you lost?"
No.
The old man opened the door on a solitary hiker, a young man of about 30. "Sir, I'm sorry to bother you again. I was trying to paddle back out of the bay, but the wind was just too goddamn strong, so I turned back." The hermit noticed that it was raining, the pitter patter growing louder against his aluminum siding. "Again, huh? I'm really busy right now. Just go back and wait in the lean-to for the storm to pass." He turned back to check on Keith, but he was gone. He looked around the small cottage for the man. "Keith, where the hell did you go?" The man at the door answered. "Sir, I'm right here. My name's Keith Lane, remember? We met and chatted a couple of hours ago. I'm vacationing with my wife and baby girl just down the lake."